I'm John Little, and this is the ShockCast.
Altitude, velocity, light. 8.5 down, 220 feet. 15 forward. 11 forward, coming down nicely.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
As I said yesterday, intelligence operations are expensive. We already know the cost of wars, but very few understand the incredible costs required to maintain intelligence gathering networks and engaging in covert operations. Furthermore, governments like to keep their hands clean. They want to be able to say that the assassination of such and so was a complete surprise and none of their doing. This is part of why intelligence organizations like to have secret sources of income so that they can operate freely without having to justify their actions. Oh, and there's this very interesting phrase, follow the money. You find some very interesting people when you do that. Before jumping into what the title talks about, I would like to go off on a bit of a tangent. Just a few hours after posting my first article and a video about Gladio, I saw this article about something disturbingly similar. The article is called "Extortion by Rogue Police Gangs is Booming in Bolsonaro's Brazil" from Bloomberg. Just as my article and video talked about something created for good that turned completely evil, here is an article about the creation of a security operation tasked with protecting the population that turned into a parasite that was killing the population. Just like Gladio, this security force needed money to fund their operations, so they turned to crime to get that money. Here are 4 paragraphs that I grabbed from the article. Quote, "Militias, bands of rogue and off-duty police and other security officers started operating in Rio's impoverished western neighborhoods a few decades ago. Politicians either turned a blind eye or collaborated with the groups which were ostensibly formed to drive out drug traffickers, but mutated into mafia that charged for services such as security, cooking gas, internet access, and cable TV. These gangs are now active across Rio and 14 other cities in the state, affecting the lives of 2 million people, police say." And then in another paragraph, "The militia operates an extensive protection racket that with fees ranging from $5 a month for a small house to $375 for large businesses. Recently, it expanded into illegally developing land, selling and smuggling cigarettes, which offer rich profits and lesser criminal penalties than drugs." And then police say militia members have infiltrated the mayor's office and employment agency. Armed, hooded men frequent the job center, according to 2 Itaboraí residents who requested anonymity for fear of reprisals. The militia demands a cut of workers' salaries for employment, the people said. "The rise of militias over the oil business is very worrisome," says Helvio Rebescini, an executive at Plural, a fuel distribution association. "There are militias operating a growing number of illegal gas stations, and Petrobras has been a victim of growing oil theft on its oil pipelines." Close quote. Brazil wanted to get rid of the illegal drugs that were flooding the streets of Brazil. The police weren't big enough or strong enough to solve the problem by themselves, so they turned to militias. The militias reduced the amount of heroin and cocaine on the streets of Brazil, but they then became yet another problem that Brazil can't handle. Oh, and where did the drugs come from? The article doesn't say, but the conclusion of this video will tell you exactly where those drugs come from. So, let's get to that Chinese heroin. And no, we won't be completely talked, but anyway, moving on. It pains me to say this, but it looks like China deserves to be conquered by Mao Zedong. And I'm not completely sure that I can blame Chiang Kai-Shek. Some blame Chiang enthusiastically, others claim that he was unable to control the warlords that were his generals, and both sides in the discussion have an axe to grind. So I can't be completely certain which is true, but one thing is very, very clear. Chiang Kai-shek's Chinese Nationalist Party, or KMT, was selling heroin to the United States. The irony is that Chiang Kai-shek actually made opioid abuse illegal in China and imposed draconian punishments upon addicts and especially on those selling the drugs. Those laws carried over to Taiwan, where being caught selling heroin was an automatic death sentence until recently. But someone somewhere in the KMT, way back before they were kicked out of China, had a nice deal going with the Green Circles gang, who was distributing heroin. It was sort of like Nixon's war on drugs. On the one hand, you had the DEA putting small-time dealers and users into prison, while the CIA was running heroin out of the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia. And no, I don't know if Nixon knew about what the CIA was doing. Well, after the communists launched their revolution in 1927, the government, led by the KMT and Chiang Kai-shek, needed money to fight the communists, and when you are engaged in a civil war, gathering taxes is difficult. So they sold opium. By the way, what's the difference between a civil war and a revolution? You call it a revolution when you win. Just saying. Anyway, opium and then heroin was being used by the KMT to get enough money to beat Mao's communists. And as the KMT kept losing battles, they kept being pushed south, and even further south. Eventually, they wound up being split in two. The biggest part of the KMT was in Taiwan, the other, and you can guess where they would wind up, in what would become known as the Golden Triangle. If you don't know what the Golden Triangle is, it's the mountainous area alongside the borders of Thailand, Laos, and Burma, now called Myanmar, associated with the production of that heroin that we've been talking about. And it was that part of the KMT, under the command of General Li Mi, that created the Golden Triangle after they lost to the communists, by growing opium and converting it into heroin. Who was shipping out the heroin? The CIA. They brought in weapons and materials via C-46 and C-47 transport planes and brought out heroin in their return flights. Where was that heroin going? Well, let me ask you a question, a different one. When did America have her heroin epidemics? Well, they say that there have been 3 of them in the latter half of the 20th century, but actually the past 70 years has been one long heroin epidemic. And I think that you can figure out where that heroin was coming from during the early years of this epidemic and who was bringing it in. It was the Chinese heroin from China that started the epidemic, and it was KMT heroin from the Golden Triangle that kept the epidemic going. Oh, and again, CIA airplanes were flying all that heroin into the US and everywhere else in the world. Now, this might seem just a little incredible to you right at this moment. It's hard to believe that the CIA would do something like this. But let me offer a fact that will help you verify everything that I'm saying. Remember that the Golden Triangle was the #1 producer of heroin until, and you'll probably guess, until after the American invasion of Afghanistan. That's right. After the American invasion of Afghanistan, the top producer of heroin switched from the Golden Triangle to the Golden Crescent, Afghanistan. And about 90% of all the heroin on the streets of the world comes from Afghanistan. How did it get out of Afghanistan? Well, I could leave it for you to guess, but let me help you think this through. Afghanistan is a landlocked country, so ships are out. You could drive it out by truck, but there aren't many roads out of Afghanistan, and all of them are heavily monitored and controlled. Then there's the venerable donkey. Oh yes, the donkey. Journalists love to weave tales of donkeys laden with barrels of poppy juice, trudging over the tortuous Hindu Kush mountains into Pakistan. Right. Tens of thousands of tons of poppy juice shipped out by donkey. If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. Furthermore, we already know how the heroin is getting out of Afghanistan via U.S. cargo planes, CIA cargo planes. Now, how else are you going to get 2,500 tons of heroin out of Afghanistan? And yes, every year, 2,500 tons. Remember that it takes many tons of poppy juice to get a ton of heroin. Again, it's a landlocked country and the U.S. controls the air. I think that you can do the math. I already have. The point that you need to get is that the CIA and the OSS before it has been distributing heroin throughout the world from China, then the Golden Triangle, and then from Afghanistan for more than 70 years. They made trillions of dollars during those 7 decades, and they shipped thousands of tons of heroin around the world every year and destroyed the lives of millions upon millions of people and wrecked whole countries. I'm just sorry that the history of Taiwan is stained by having had a role in this drug trade. The Taiwanese people themselves had no role. They didn't even want the KMT when they arrived on this island, and the current government certainly didn't have a role in this drug trade. But Chiang Kai-Shek, either he or someone under him definitely had a huge role, and he didn't break off ties with General Lee in the Golden Triangle when he should have known what Lee was doing. I find it hard to believe that Chiang didn't know. He was not a stupid man. I just hate the thought that he was part of this. Anyway, please understand that there could never have been a heroin epidemic without the CIA. They caused this epidemic. They made it as bad as they could possibly make it to make as much money as they could possibly make. And they used at least some of that money to fund Gladio. And they started with Chinese heroin. Hey, you like that video, right? Great. Click like and subscribe and hit that bell to get notified. Then go to the next level. Subscribe to the Shock Letter at theshockletter.com and follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Now, read my book, Ezekiel's Fire, at ezekielsfire.com. Why? Because Ezekiel's Fire is coming.